Amen. All right, so today we begin a brand new conversation, and we're calling it You People. And we're not talking about you people. We're talking about those people, those people that are outside of us, obviously. Let me ask you a question. Do you know anyone who's a narcissist in your life? Any narcissistic people? What about judgmental people, overly critical? What about hypocritical people? Okay, all right. All right, so we have these people in our lives that we find it a little bit difficult to deal with. And when it comes to specifically narcissistic people, what I find is we tend to listen to TED Talks, we tend to research and Google how to tell if someone's a narcissist, right? Anybody did that before? All right, you can talk back to me today. We tend to look outside for these answers on how to deal with these kinds of people, but I want to let you know that as followers of Jesus, the Bible is our source of truth. It is a place that we can go to learn how God has taught us to deal with even the difficult people that we face in our lives. And so I don't want you to think that there are certain topics that are more spiritual than others. You with me today? So when we talk about narcissistic people, and when we look at what the Bible says and how the Bible helps us to navigate and deal with narcissistic people, we learned how we navigate and deal with just tough relationships in general. And it all is spiritual. It's all God-honoring. And I think that what we have to learn to do as people is understand that the Bible is relevant to what we're dealing with in our everyday lives. Would you agree? Okay. All right. So if you have your Bibles today, we're going to turn to 1 Samuel chapter 15, and we're going to take a look at a guy. His name is King Saul. He's the first king of Israel. Israel asked for a king, and God gave him a king, and his name was Saul. And we're going to take a look at Saul because Saul seems like he's got some narcissistic tendencies. And so what I want to do first of all is I want to define what narcissism is, and then we'll unpack how we deal with narcissistic people. So let's take a look at narcissism and let's just define it. Okay, narcissism is this. It is characterized by a grandiose sense of self-importance. It's a lack of empathy for others. It's a need for excessive admiration. Talk about excessive admiration. I'm not saying you can't want to be admired for certain things. I'm talking excessive, right? And it is the belief that one is unique and deserving of special treatment. I know all of y'all got one thing, but I need the special thing, okay? Because I'm special. All right, it's this grandiose, this really grand sense of self. That there are people who centered themselves in the room. They're the main point of the conversation. Even if the conversation has nothing to do with them, somehow you end up talking about them. You know those people? Certainly not anyone that you're here with today. But some of y'all look a little uncomfortable, so you might be sitting next to somebody. So just blink. All right. Don't make no movements. But we know these people in our lives. But here's what I want to do. I want to make sure that we don't do something that I think we do too often. And I got some folks in here who, you know how you have like symptoms, maybe your pinky toe is hurting, and you go on Google and you start to diagnose yourself, and then you start planning your funeral because certainly you're on your way out of here because Google said I got diverticulitis. I'm on my way out. That's the kind of people we are. We tend to label ourselves off of things that we perceive to be true, may or may not be true. We get a feeling, we see something on the surface, and then we'll connect dots that don't really need to be connected. You know, that's the kind of people that we are. You know, the eclipse, and certainly Jesus is coming back because of the eclipse, and And I don't think he's waiting for the stars to align for him to come back. He's waiting for a church without spot or wrinkle. That's another conversation. But what I want to make sure of is that we don't fall into the trap of labeling people outside of our scope of authority. Okay, narcissism, and particularly narcissistic personality disorder, (NPD), is a medical diagnosis. Like psychologists and medical doctors can diagnose someone with this particular disorder. Okay, and so what I don't want you to do is just go around calling people narcissistic just because you had a bad interaction with them. I don't want you calling your family members narcissistic just because they're getting on your nerves right now in this particular season of life. But here's what I know. I know that sometimes we are the ones that people have not the best things to say about, given a particular season of our lives. So we certainly wouldn't want someone to mislabel us because they're making a temporary, they're making a final judgment based on temporary data. Like, I'm just in a space right now in my life. And so I don't want you labeling people narcissists. We're quick to throw that word around because we just learned it, you know? 10 years ago, nobody was talking about narcissists. 20 years ago, what was that, you know? But now it's like, ooh, you dealing with a narcissist. You better divorce them. No. All right. So what do we need to do? Here's the first thing that we need to do when dealing with people that we perceive as narcissists. I want you to write this down. We first have to acknowledge the difference between people who have a narcissistic disorder versus people who are just demonstrating or displaying narcissistic tendencies. Because those are two totally different things, okay? Two totally different things. I can display some narcissistic tendencies at times, okay? Sometimes I just want to be admired. Jenny? Pastor Jenny? No. Sometimes I just want to be admired, you know. But we all, if we're honest today, we all kind of have a little bit of those narcissistic tendencies. And so what I really want to talk about today is I want to talk about how do we deal with people who have narcissistic tendencies. Because there's no way for us to say, okay, this person is definitely a narcissist, right? Unless you have their medical records. But we can talk about how do we deal with people who display these tendencies and sort of guard our hearts in the event that someone does have that disorder, even if they haven't been diagnosed. You here today? All right, you glad you came to church? Okay, now in John chapter 7, Jesus does something when he's teaching in the temple. He's teaching, and he went to the temple with his brothers. He's teaching, and because of what he's teaching, right, on the surface, the crowd begins to go, what in the world is this man saying? This can't be right. Because on the surface, it just sounds kind of crazy to them. And then they say, you must be used by a demon right now. And so they're shouting out, they're calling him a demon, and he says these words. And I actually think this is kind of like a timeless principle that we need to apply to our lives. It says this in John chapter 7, verse 24. He says, I want you to look beneath the surface so you can judge correctly. Look beneath the surface so you can judge correctly. We as people, as humans, we are so used to snap judgments. Somebody does something, it could be on the highway, it could be on the way in. Someone look at you funny, and you got to snap who they think they are. Why they look at me like that? Oh, that person is crazy because I saw them in the store. You'll never guess who I saw in the store going berserk, like we make snap judgments based on temporary data, things that are happening on the surface. But Jesus is telling, and they did the same thing to Jesus, right? He's teaching them something. It don't sound right to them. They're like, you must be used by a demon. And he's like, listen, you got to look beneath the surface so you can judge correctly. So the first thing that I want you to do when you're dealing with someone who you think is displaying narcissistic tendencies is I want you to look beyond the surface so that you can judge correctly. And let's take a look at 1 Samuel chapter 15. There's this king I was telling you about. His name is Saul. I'm not saying that King Saul is a narcissist, right? I don't have his medical records. But it would appear that there are some narcissistic tendencies that sort of pop out as we're looking at the way that he's handling things in this particular season of his life. And so I'm going to read this and just follow me as we read this 1 Samuel chapter 15, starting in the first verse. It says this, one day Samuel Samuel was a prophet. He's a judge at this time. Samuel said to Saul, "It was the Lord who told me to anoint you as king of his people, Israel." Now, I want you to listen to this message from the Lord. I want you to stop right here so you understand what's happening. Samuel is about to give Saul a message from who? From the Lord. Okay? So there's no ambiguity about who this message is from. It's from the Lord. Now let's look at what the message says. He says this. He says, "This is what the Lord of heaven's armies has declared. I have decided to settle accounts with the nation of Amalek and for opposing Israel when they came to Egypt." And I want you to keep going. It says, "Now go and completely destroy." Everyone say, completely destroy the entire Amalekite nation. Men, women, children, babies, cattle, sheep, goats, camels, and donkeys. So Saul mobilized his army. Now he said, "I want you to go up in this place, and I want you to destroy everything, everyone. I want you to completely destroy it." And you go, "Oh my goodness, that God is the worst." It would appear that this is a really drastic thing, a really drastic thing. But you have to understand that in this time, there's a God who is dealing with his people in a very specific way. And there are certain things that are happening right now. There's certain rebellions and there's certain sins that on the surface we may not be aware of that God is judging in this moment. And his justice is to wipe out the Amalekites. Okay. But he says completely destroy all of them, every last one of them. Now, Saul is not confused about what God is asking him to do. And I want you to know that sometimes we just want to do our own thing. Not that we're confused at what God is asking us to do. Sometimes we just kind of want to do our own thing. Anybody? Just me. Now, look what it says in verse 9. It says, "Saul and his men spared Agag's life and kept the best of the sheep and the goats." Now remember, what was he supposed to do? Completely destroy everything. And he decided to spare this guy's life, and he kept the best of the sheep and the goats, the cattle, the fat calves, and the lambs. In fact, everything that appealed to them. They destroyed only what was worthless or of poor quality. So in this moment, Saul he's actually in direct rebellion against God's instruction. Now you have to understand, this is not Saul's first rodeo. He is used to God telling him to do a particular task, follow a particular instruction, and he's used to acting out that thing. But in this moment, he's actively saying, "Okay, I heard what God said, but we might want some sheep. We might want some lamb chops tonight." You know? And so he's thinking, I don't know if I want to get rid of it because it appeals to him. Then down in verse 12, it says this. It says, "Early the next morning, Samuel went to find Saul." And this is what someone told Samuel. Saul went to the town of Carmel to set up a monument to himself. So not only is he disregarding the instructions of God, he's celebrating himself because he believes that he did something good. He's like, I destroyed these people. I'm setting up a monument to myself. And what's about to happen is Samuel is about to confront Saul. And Saul's about to act like he don't know what's going on. And in fact, he's, you know those people who they do something and you confront them about it and they go, "You should be thanking me. You should be thanking me. What I did, even though it was toxic and it harmed you and you're trying to communicate to me that it hurt you and I'm not hearing that at all. You should be celebrating me. I saved you some trouble." And this is what Saul's attitude is right now. And he does something. I'm going to give you 3 narcissistic tendencies that Saul sort of does that kind of shows us that he's got these tendencies, and I want you to be aware of them so you can recognize them. Here's what it says in Samuel 15, but verse 13. It says this. It says, when Samuel finally found Saul, Saul greeted him cheerfully. May the Lord bless you. I have carried out the Lord's command. He's just set up a monument for himself, so he's just really, really sure that he's doing the right thing. And Samuel says, then what is all the bleating of sheep and goats and the lowing of cattle that I hear? Samuel demanded. He says, it is true. It is true that the who? Army spared the best of the sheep, goats, and cattle. Saul admitted. But they're going to sacrifice them to the Lord your God. We destroyed everything else. And right now in this moment, he does something that narcissistic tendencies tend to demonstrate. He does this. It's called blame shifting. He shifts the blame. And blame shifting is this. It's when a person tries to dodge responsibility for their words or action by assigning blame to someone else. He says that army, they did keep some stuff. But let me tell you why. They did it because they were planning on sacrificing it to the Lord your God, you know? All while you just set up a monument to yourself, they was finna sacrifice to the Lord. Okay. So he shifts the blame. But then he continues on. And Samuel says this in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 19. He goes on to say, but why haven't you obeyed the Lord? Why did you rush for the plunder and do what was evil in the Lord's sight? Look now what he's about to do, what Saul is about to do, is what people who demonstrate these tendencies tend to do, which is they tend to rewrite history. He says, but I did obey the Lord. I carried out the mission he gave me. I brought back the king, and I destroyed everyone else. Now, was God's instruction to go to the Amalekites, bring back the king, and destroy everyone else? So why is he telling him that he obeyed the mission that the Lord gave him? He's rewriting history. He's trying to make it seem like this is the thing that God told me to do. That's not the thing God told you to do. And he says, I brought back the king and destroyed everyone else. And then he goes on to blame shift again. But then my troops brought in the best of the sheep, goats, cattle, and plunder to sacrifice to the Lord. And so now he's trying to gaslight Samuel. And this is what gaslighting is, because we say this word a lot in our culture, gaslight. Stop gaslighting me. And this is what it actually means. It is psychological manipulation. And it causes a person to question the validity of their own thoughts, perception of reality, or memories. And I think if Samuel wasn't a prophet of the Lord, and if he hadn't heard from God specifically about what Saul did, Saul might have got him. Well, maybe you did do what God told you to do. You did destroy the people, and you brought back the king. Maybe you did do what God told you to do. And sometimes you encounter people who make you question the reality that you know to be true, but they make you feel like maybe you got something mixed up. And those are those narcissistic tendencies we're talking about. So blame shifting and then gaslighting. And as the story is going to continue, we don't have time to unpack the entire story, but what happens is God removes Saul from being king. And he goes on in the next chapter to anoint a new king, who is David. But Saul starts to get jealous of David. And the more people start celebrating David for all that he's done, Saul is not the center of everyone's attention anymore. And then he goes into this third tendency that I want to highlight, which is narcissistic rage. And he tries to kill David. Narcissistic rage is this. It's an outburst of intense anger or silence. Just because someone is silent doesn't mean they're not full of rage. So the question, though, that we're here to deal with is, how do we deal with individuals like this? Or people who have these tendencies? Here's the first thing. I'm going to give you three things, but here's the first thing. We have to recognize the root of their insecurity. Recognize the root of their insecurity. Contrary to what we might think, narcissism is actually more of a symptom than it is a root cause of something. There's something underlining, there's something underneath the surface that is happening in an individual's life, and they're expressing it through these narcissistic behaviors. And so Saul's underlining motivation, actually Samuel calls it out. He says this in 1 Samuel 15, verse 17. He says, and Samuel told him, although you may think little of yourself, are you not the leader of the tribes of Israel? The Lord has anointed you as king. Now you have to ask yourself a question. Why does Samuel tell Saul that he's thinking little of himself when Saul just set up a monument to himself? If you set up a monument to yourself, I'm thinking that you think you kind of big time. You think that you're deserving of worship. But Samuel sees past that. He sees past the smoke signals, and he's saying, no, I know you think too little of yourself, but you're the king of Israel, and God has anointed you as king of Israel. And so he's speaking to the root of his insecurity. And if you go back a few chapters when Saul is first anointed to be king, you'll see that Saul actually felt insecure. He felt like he wasn't worthy. He was a part of a small clan, and he felt like he wasn't worthy enough to be king. And so Samuel was actually speaking to a root insecurity within Saul. And so we have to recognize that the narcissistic behaviors that you're seeing, that's not the root. That's what they're displaying, but there's a root of insecurity there. Here's the second thing. After we recognize the root of insecurity, you might have to remove them from their seat of authority in your life. And I know this can be tough, especially when we're dealing with family. At this point, I'm talking specifically about family. You have a auntie and uncle, a mom or dad, and it's hard for you to set up boundaries, because it's hard for you to establish boundaries with someone who has a voice of authority in your life. And in order for you to have a healthy relationship, now look, I'm not saying to end a relationship. Now that might be something you might need to do, but that's not what I'm talking about right now. What I'm talking about right now is you might need to remove them from having a seat of authority in your life. Meaning their opinions can't hold weight for you anymore. Their desires for you and their will for your life, that can't be the guiding voice anymore. And that's what happened with King Saul. God removed him from the seat of authority over the king, over the people of Israel. And you're thinking, well, why so drastic? I mean, all he did was bring this guy back and brought some sheep back. And God speaks through Samuel and says these words, and we quote this a lot today, but it's 1 Samuel 15:23. This is where it comes from. It says, rebellion is as sinful as witchcraft, and stubbornness as bad as worshiping idols. So because you have rejected the command of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. And I think that when you're dealing with someone who has these tendencies and you notice that they're not receptive to correction and they're rebelling and they're kind of stubborn, you think, oh, that's just who they are. But I want you to know, like, if you're going to have a healthy relationship with yourself and respect for your own sanity and emotional well-being, you might have to have the conversation about removing them from that seat of authority. Okay, I can't put you on this pedestal anymore. I love you. I honor you. But I can't hold you to the place that I had you before. Recognize the root of their insecurity. Remove them from their seat of authority. And then here's the next thing that we want to do. We want to pray for the gospel to transform their hearts. And this is kind of what separates us from the rest of the world. Because the world can recognize the root of their insecurity. The rest of the world can remove a person from the seat of authority. But as followers of Jesus, we have to take it one step further, and we have to pray for the gospel to transform their hearts. Understanding that it is the power of the gospel, the only thing that has the power to transform a person's heart is the power of God unto salvation. And we as followers of Jesus, as disciples of him, we have a whole new way of life. We have a whole new God. We have a whole new way of how we make decisions and how we view others. Look at what it says in 2 Corinthians 5:16. It says, so we have stopped evaluating others from a human point of view. At one time, we thought of Christ merely from a human point of view. How differently we know him now. And this means that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone, and a new life has begun. And if you belong to Christ, the beautiful thing that he did, we celebrated this last week, the resurrection of Jesus is the power to raise us from death to life, to change our whole entire reality, to take away the past, and to give us on a new trajectory, put us on a new trajectory, to give us life anew. God has that power, and we live in a culture that wants to dismiss people and to just cancel people, and even those narcissistic people that you can't stand, we still have an obligation to pray for God to transform their hearts. Why? Because we believe he can. And we believe that there's nothing too hard for him. We have fallen into the trap, I think, where once we've labeled someone a narcissist, it's almost like there's no hope for them. That person's a narcissist, just let it, nothing could be done at this point. No, that's not true. Nothing we can do. That's true. So we recognize the root of their insecurity, remove them from the seat of authority, but we can pray for the gospel to transform their hearts. And as followers of Jesus, that's what we should do. If you keep going and reading in 2 Corinthians 5, he tells us, like, we are now ambassadors of reconciliation, saying, be reconciled to God. So I don't want to leave you just with a prayer for them. I want to leave you with a prayer for you people. I want to leave you with a prayer that you can pray over yourself. I'm going to give you 5 prayers that you can pray over yourself. And I think this will help us as we navigate how to deal with narcissistic people. Glad you came to church today? Here's the first prayer. God, help me to not label people outside the scope of my authority. Can we just, right where you are, let's pray that prayer together. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. God, help me to not label people outside of the scope of my authority. We've been given a message and an authority that says that there's hope in Jesus. We've been given a gospel, a good news to proclaim and to preach, that God can turn anyone's life around. And so the only label that I'm willing to dish out is God can, and God will, and God is able to do more than we could ever imagine. Here's a second prayer that we can pray. God, help me to acknowledge and not suppress my frustration. I want to talk to anyone in here who you have a hard time admitting that you're being impacted by a person's action. You have a hard time acknowledging that you're actually hurt by the way that someone behaves. You're actually impacted and affected by the way that someone else is treating you, and you suppress and you suppress and you ignore because of the seat of authority that they have in your life, or because of the dynamics of the relationship that you have with them. And I want you to pray this prayer: God, help me to acknowledge and not suppress my frustrations. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to acknowledge that some folk getting on your nerve. And then the third prayer is this: God, help me to empathize and not just excuse their behavior. I want you to pray for empathy. I want you to ask God to help you to empathize, because you know that there's a root of insecurity that is in them. But that you empathize with them is not to excuse or justify the behavior as if it's okay. So I want you to be very specific. God, help me to empathize but not excuse their behavior. Because I want you to empathize with people. But I don't want you to be a doormat and just excuse behaviors that don't mean you well. And then this prayer is a little bit different, but I think it's necessary. Here's the fourth prayer: God, help me to recognize the narcissistic tendencies within myself. God, help me to recognize when I'm the one, when I'm the villain. It's not always about them. Sometimes it's me. And humility, as followers of Jesus, says, God, help me. Help me to recognize when it's me. And then here's the fifth prayer: God, empower me. Empower me. I can't do this in my own strength. Empower me to put healthy boundaries in place when I'm dealing with the narcissistic tendencies of others. When I begin to sense and beneath the surface perceive that this individual is blame shifting and gaslighting and is rageful, God, help me to just establish healthy boundaries. And this prayer is important because sometimes the thing you need is courage. Because of who it is. You don't want to hurt them, and although they've hurt you, and you're so used to just letting it happen, taking it, and God is saying it's okay to establish healthy boundaries, and in fact, let me empower you to do it. We recognize the root of their insecurity, remove them from the seat of authority, and we pray for the gospel to transform their hearts.